welcome to all students that have joined us tonight, and thank you so much for joining us. Today we have a very special guest, Simon Murphy, who is the Executive Strategy Director at Publicis Worldwide in Brisbane. And Simon is an influential and accomplished strategy director. He has over 18 years of experience in communications industry, and of course, has worked in one of the best or some of the best advertising agencies around Australia and around the world, including Publicis Paris, Saatchi & Saatchi, and of course now in Publicis Worldwide in Brisbane. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Simon Murphy and hand it over to you, Simon. He's going to talk about brand positioning. Welcome to our virtual cafe.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nicholas, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking about brand positioning through Zoom. So my light's just gone off. I think from a perspective, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on theory. My assumption here is that your lecturers and your tutors are probably better versed at speaking to the theory of brand positioning than me, and possibly in your studies have already undertaken, and thought about that in some degree. What I think where I can add some value to you as you transition out of uni in the coming months and into the workforce potentially, is some of the realities of practice, the realities of developing a brand positioning in the real world. As Nicholas said, I've worked in this 18 years. It's actually more, so I need to update my LinkedIn profile. And over that time, I've always been in the strategy department from day one. And I think, having seen some of the best people work, learning from some of the best, also, trying to drive that myself. There's a theory, and then there's a reality of the dynamics of working with clients, with cross-functional teams, working under pressure, working in an imperfect environment, and how to navigate that. I think is probably where I can add some insight into as you transition out of the university environment. So, but first of all, I'm going to start off a few slides of what the experts say, the theory, if you like, and I think, I even Googled this and thought, what is the definition of brand positioning? I'm rarely given the time to actually think about that, because we just do it. But it's nice to actually think why we actually do this. And, brand positioning, and I'm reading this, describes how a brand is different from its competitors and where or how it sits in the consumer's mind. Whether it's the guys like Rees and Trout, whether it's theoreticians like Kotler, it always seems to be that what we are trying to occupy is a position in our consumers or customers or person down the street's mind, in a very simple, single-minded approach. Advertising itself, born many years ago, I guess, when people were selling tomatoes in villages and trying to get more customers. But more recently, companies used to be producers of products, and it was easy or easier when you didn't have the competitive sets that you have now. But now, we're really trying to become, brokers of meaning, and really colonize, that physical space is now extending into the mental space. And we're trying to occupy a little box, a little drawer, a little piece of a consumer's mind to shortcut decision making. I see David's back as well, so I hope we're hearing stories of storms. I won't labour this, but certainly where a reference, if you haven't picked up or looked at, is Positioning, the Battle for Your Mind. Al Rees, Jack Trout, one of the many guys who probably coined and started pushing this positioning approach in the late 80s and so on. And they argue that it's not what you do to the product, it's what you do to the mind of the prospect. And certainly, why is this important? Well, product proliferation is rife. Technical parity is increasingly the norm. The ability to copy products quickly is probably diminishes that first party advantage very quickly. The media explosion that we've got, and fragmentation. So our ability to differentiate or choose what we truly value is diminished. Brands help us choose. Those little drawers that we occupy in the mind help us choose. They're invaluable tools that basically help us break the clutter and, stand out in that sea of confusion and clutter we've got there. So the point here is, so little message or product detail gets through that you start to ignore the sender. That's the company that is, creating the work, and concentrate on the consumer, on the receiver, the consumer. Now, that may sound ordinarily obvious, but one of the interesting challenges I'll get to in the lessons that I've learned is, when you say you ignore the sender is often the client. The sender is often the 39 people that are in the room, that are commissioning your work. And sometimes, what seems so obvious on paper, follow your consumer, is not how it plays out in reality. And it's a role of us as, let's say, an independent guardian of people's brands. I think that's how we strategists like to think ourselves, in advertising agencies, guardians of the brand. It's that dynamic there, makes it, even more important to be objective, even more important to be pure in our thinking, and drive through it to the end we're all trying to achieve. Um, Simple imagery here. There's a 60-minute strategist presentation that's wonderful. I believe it's on SlideShare as well. But to get that point across very quickly, De Beers, as the example, has been very successful, in creating the association of diamonds with eternal love. It's the symbol of love. And you can see through their famous brands, FedEx overnight, Prada, probably luxury. Adidas is now, becoming very much associated with streetwear, 7-Eleven with 24 hours. It's just these simple little associations, positions in people's mind, that'd be very difficult for, other brands, to debunk. And I think that's one of the phenomenons of brands as well, is once you occupy that space, it's yours. In large part, it's very hard to change. It's very hard to change the direction of a brand. And so occupying something that's, relevant, that's culturally important, can see you having success for a long time. I mean, brands are confusing. They're confusing after 20 plus years in the industry. As a strategist, that's kind of my sole reason for existence. Certainly in the second half of my career, after the ad tweaking of the first half. But it's probably only me that cares about that in many regards. Creatives talk about the profile of the agency and the creative product. Account service are all about the relationship. So there's still a lot of confusion about brands, how that relates to advertising, what it is exactly. And it's certainly not a trademark. It's not a mission statement. This is the reminders of why we're here. It's a logo or a tagline, no. A product or service, the tangibles, absolutely not. It's not even advertising. A brand is a point of view. It's a point of view, not a series of messages. It creates value. I think that's, one of the more important things of a brand, a blueprint of how we create value throughout an entire organization. It's a competitive advantage, the key tool for creating sustainable difference and change. It's engineered, it's a deliberate, strategic, crafted, obsessive process to get right. And certainly it's part science and part art. And once you put all those things together, it's more than the sum of its tangible parts. It's more than a product. It's more than a service. It's more than, the pieces that put that together to create that. And that's where you get the equity from. One of the big lessons I learned early on in my career is, how do you get into the mind? And there's really only two things you can do. You can be first in a category, fix your message in a mind of, just removing everyone from there, fix your message in a mind not burnished by someone else's brand. That's the easy way to go. You want to be first. You want to occupy that space. But as you know, in grocery, as you know, in telcos, as you know, in cars, in every other category imaginable, you often have tier 1 brands, tier 2, tier 3, and so on and so on. There's many, many brands competing for that consumer's mind. And, the analysis behind it is, we know the category drivers, we know the category that we're defined. We know the key drivers that, are the most persuasive and the most relevant to change the behavior of a consumer. So we're all going after the same thing. We're all going after the same piece of that person's mind. Obviously, that's not positioning. So if you can't be first, you really need to be different. And the way we think about it is, where possible, create a new category. Find something you can be first in. And in that way, you've got an opportunity to grow and to win, and not just be a second to a market leader, a tier 1, a tier 2 brand. As I cycle through, I'm not laboring the theory here, but there certainly is a positioning statement, and this is how it's deconstructed. It is really, again, everything, has some sort of change around them, but it's really composed of 4 or 5 pieces. The definition of a target market, your frame of reference, largely the category you're operating in, your point of difference, what really sets you apart, and your brand benefit, the promise, the emotional promise, the functional promise that you're delivering to your consumers, and your proof points, those simple attributes of why they should believe us, the credibility we get. So, and the beauty of a brand positioning statement is that it can be really simply expressed in quite a simple sentence. For target audience, brand X is the only category that delivers X, so that they can benefit in a particular way because of these reasons to believe. And if we can drive to that level of simplicity in a unique, ownable, and differentiated way, you're actually being very, very successful. And I think it's not just unique and differentiated, it's also clearly understandable, comprehensible to the layperson, and your target who you're operating on in the street. They're very difficult to find. The one thing I will say is, when we do brand positioning workshops and development of brand positioning, this is an output, 100%, definitely, but we also complicate it further by putting it in, a brand positioning framework, which I'll touch upon a little bit later. And they can become company specific and category specific as well. Here's a couple I found and changed a little bit, I guess. But for the young at heart, Walt Disney is a theme park that best delivers an immersive and magical experience, so they can live their own fairy tale, because Walt Disney attributes connects you to the characters and worlds you most desire. You can see all those constituent parts in that of target market, of category, of your point of difference, and so on. And similarly with Coca-Cola, high quality drinks. Coca-Cola is a wide range of refreshing beverages that deliver happiness, so they can make a positive difference in people's lives, because they're, obsessively focused on customer needs. And the last slide on theory is, an assessment criteria avoids subjectivity. I think that's very, important. We actually had this conversation today with one of our clients. It's amazing how many times people say, I like it, I don't like it, I love it, and so on. There's a subjectivity around it. One of the things you'll see about brand positioning is, you have to be a salesperson. You have to be an advocate for its rally cry. And you need the argument for it. So things like relevance, clarity, being distinctive, a coherence in the way that it's delivered, and a commitment from all stakeholders. These sorts of things provide a criteria that helps avoid the subjectivity when selling it, up and down the line and into organizations. And potentially they're things, you might have come across in your years of study. What I really want to labor and have a conversation about is the idea of what happens in reality. The practice of this, and 9 things I've learnt along the way, and hopefully illustrate within that, some of the things that as you enter into the workforce should be prepared for, and won't surprise you. And I think the first one is, when it comes to developing a brand positioning, you actually never ever do it alone. And sometimes you're asked to as a strategist, And I'd probably advise against doing it on your own. And that's for many reasons. The photos you see there are actually from various workshops, probably done in the last couple of years, I think. Certainly the one on the left I put because it's just such a magnificent room. But you know, what you'll see there is the amount of chairs and tables and size of the place that you're actually going to create this thing. To create a good brand positioning, largely they're done through multidiscipline workshops. So cross-functional workshops, if you like, where you've got people from advertising, from strategy, potentially account service, all the different clients, product, R&D, you know, certainly legal as well to a certain extent, and a cross-functional team to ensure everyone, as you develop that, has their fingerprints on the brand positioning when you've got it finished. A brand positioning needs to be the true north of what happens within an organization. If there's no commitment, if there's no ownership over that document from many people in the organization, it can tend to be left in a drawer, or even certainly as part of the marketing department alone, which is not where you want it to be. You want it to be, you know, the true north of an organization. It's a messy process. You know, we can have workshops where certainly we can sit there through a process and get the data, but there's lots of ideas, there's lots of rubbish all over the floor. And there's potentially no linear process through that, as you're constantly iterating, reiterating, crafting new ideas, throw up new opportunities. But in a room where sometimes you've got 40 people, you know, a messy process and keeping them on task is no simple thing. I think the risk of brand positioning, which is the absolute antithesis of its reason for being, is those co-creation workshops risk groupthink, risk that idea of watering down the positioning, or at best, or alternatively, multiple ideas in the statement. So for us, as standing up there, driving that process, sucking all the information from different perspectives from people who have different levels of expertise, you know, we got to drive for that single-mindedness, but be absolutely prepared in a room full of 40 people to be flexible as how we get there. Certainly no easy task. But I think there's one trick I do, which, as I said, you never do it alone. I start off with a straw man, before I walk into that room, for any uncomfortable moments of silences. That I can always fill the gap and push the conversation. But the purpose of never doing it alone, you get to a better outcome, but more importantly, you're creating advocates within the organization for the outcome. And once you've got those advocates, you've got a better chance of success. Incidentally, it's normally a 1.5 to 2 day process with homework, pre-work, and crafting at the end. So it's certainly not quick. I think as strategists, one of the challenges we've got is we're guiding the process. We're not necessarily a huge, in that facilitation, contributor to the conversation unless when needed. And so we've got to learn to see the bigger picture. You know, we've got to learn to see the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. With a brand, you know, we're setting the direction for life of that brand that, as I touched on earlier, is almost impossible to change in a consumer's mind once set. I think that's, I work with a lot of data and work with a lot of brand imagery statements. And a brand could neglect its origin for years, even decades, which is currently the situation with a brand in front of me at the moment. Yet the imagery data, apart from being undifferentiated elsewhere, still has its strengths based in what it was once strong as in the 1960s. And that is not an uncommon thing. I think once you've got a strength, once you occupy a place in a person's mind, you don't really change that. And to change the course is very, very challenging. You're also, when I say learn to see the bigger picture, you're balancing a mosaic of forces. To get that brand positioning, you're bringing in culture, you're bringing in market forces, you're trying to understand consumer truths and needs and brand truths, and you're balancing that mosaic of forces into a single-minded, coherent statement, as I illustrated before. And so with that, courage in your convictions, this is definitely not a black and white game here. You know, we're creating something new at every turn in an ad agency. Every day, that's your number one KPI. Was what you're doing today different to what you did? So courage in your convictions when you're setting the future of a brand in a brand positioning, it takes courage. And a lack of ambition, I think, means parity, or, you know, it's, you know, versus your competitive and category set, which is, you know, I've got written on my piece of paper here, parity equals death, or worse, indifference from the consumer. I know.
Simon, there's a question from Rene. I think it might just pop into your feed there if you want to answer it as you go.
Yeah. Where would I see that? I'm going to go there. Chat.
Just on chat.
Does that mean you are the facilitator of those branding workshops? Yeah, Renee. Certainly in my current role as a strategist, I am tasked in most part, I'm guardians of the brand, and in large part for my clients, it's a lot of what we do is facilitate those workshops. But facilitator reduces that to we become the owner of that document. Absolutely. I don't know if, so yes, we facilitate it, but we facilitate the process, but we facilitate and are responsible for the outcome. And as a consequence, once that's done, you know, we craft the document, we understand that narrative, you know, and bring that narrative to life. Does that help? Yep, perfect. So we've got to learn to see the bigger picture. And the reason why we need to learn to see the bigger picture is that cross-functional team I mentioned earlier in the piece don't see the bigger picture. They're sitting in their world of R&D or innovation or product development or legal or regulations or supply chain, and all very valuable because they know the brand and marketing, of course, and they know the brand, but someone needs to have that bigger picture in mind to ensure differentiation, to ensure the positioning doesn't sit in parity with its category and in difference with its audience. And that's not to say proof points can't be parity. I think there's points of parity and points of difference. I've had that conversation with Nicholas in the past. My particular point of view on points of parity is, yes, at a very tangible level, they will not differentiate you from the people, the brands around you, but it's incumbent on us as marketers or advertisers to do that point of parity in the best way we can through the lens of our brand. So really try and work as hard as we can at every juncture. Lesson number 3 is the idea that you can't please everyone. You know, a brand positioning is increasingly, there's no daylight between a business and the brand. Now, that wasn't always the case in, you know, many, probably when I started, or I don't want to be too old, but, you know, you had the business and the commercial guys and the sales guys who sat to the left, and they never really crossed over into marketing or advertising. In fact, you know, they derided us by, you know, the marketing department was the fluffy ones. But now the CMO has a seat, you know, with the CEO, and the brand position that you develop doesn't just guide marketing or communication. It guides every decision you make within that organization. So the CEO needs to be the custodian of that brand position. And that includes R&D, finance, legal regs, marketing, sales, manufacturing, procurement, human resources, and so on and so on. So, and in that way, you create a system of value creation. You know, it's a value creation where everything you do as an organization continues to build the equity well of that brand. And so you don't get on one side a whole bunch of commercial decisions which are purely commercial, and a set of brand decisions which are, you know, purely for the sake of selling stuff. It actually is the organizational system of the company. and so everyone's behavior is governed by that. A recent example that I had is actually with Subway, where we got together and, obviously community management and social and that two-way communication we have, is very highly regulated. And the idea of a company actually, responding in real time is listed with fraught with danger, fraught with legal danger. But at the same time, it's also now becomes a consumer facing message. And so, an example there is we had to actually, write their T's and C's in a way that builds the equity of the brand. Now, the legal department, they're not usually interfacing, with the marketing guys or the advertising guys. So we had to write the T's and C's in a way that would build the equity of the brand, not the generic law speak, but how Subway would speak. And a similar example with Sanofi, which is a healthcare brand, a global healthcare brand, VMS and OTC stuff and vaccines and the whole lot. Highly regulated category, both from a national perspective, but also internally as well. And again, like the products are regulated to parity. You can't absolutely say no claim that would in any way directly insist that this has a benefit or a health benefit to a consumer, which, as you know, is quite challenging. So we often sit with their medical team and their regs team to find the opportunities to at least imply, a degree of difference in the market, which can be quite challenging and build that equity. But it can often be quite difficult conversations because everyone has competing demands. And again, that becomes a reality of brand positioning as well, is we often think of it in terms of marketing and communication, but it's definitely got, it needs to be a rally cry that puts a stake in the ground for the entire organization. It's an art and a science. In our pre-conversation, I think we discussed this. Is it intuition or data? What leads? There's often in those workshops, in the development of it, in the pre-work, there's often too much data. How do we navigate that? Or not enough? It's never actually perfect, and there's never a clear set of rules saying I need A, B, and C, and that will give me the answer I need. It's rare data will crack it for you. I think these documents need to be inspiring. The human brain and potentially the collective human brain has to reconstruct that data into something new, into something inspiring, and something that'll resonate emotionally with people. A brand positioning should do that, even though, data will tell you where to play. I think another interesting point that you might come across is the question always comes up is, can we research this once you get to the end of the piece? And it interestingly, and as a strategist, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but research rarely happens in brand positioning. Certainly it happens in creative. We spend a lot of time with consumers to understand their needs, but research rarely happens in brand positioning. And the reason why is I don't think, or maybe Ipsos and Nielsen and all those big research companies would certainly disagree, but it's very difficult to put into a format consumers will understand to get a clear read on what you're trying to achieve. And it's very difficult for them to, understand what the purpose of a brand positioning is. They want to see ads, they want to see taglines, they want to see immediate tangible benefits, largely at a product or service level. So research, interestingly, for a document that guides potentially, 10 years of the brand, 99 years in the case of Bass, and, even Oreo, I think, is largely, continues in its original direction, is not largely informed by research, which has its benefits, but also has its moments of concern, because you really put a stake in the ground. But the point here being, data will tell you where to play. And humans will make it inspiring. Lesson number 5 is follow the consumer, not the R&D department. The image on the right is actually Tide or Ariel. It's a Procter & Gamble brand, which I started my career in, which is washing powder. And it's 20 plus years later, I will still go to Woolworths and Coles and sit in front of a washing powder aisle to see what is happening, how it's changed, what innovation is going on. They get under your skin. But what's interesting is of those 40 people, probably 35 of them work for the company or organization or brand um, that we're talking about. It's very easy to be inward looking, but we can't be inward looking. And if you have empathy with them, millions and millions and millions of dollars can be spent creating products, features, etc. in every product line. You know, innovation is key to brand success, and millions of dollars can be spent, but they don't necessarily act as proof points for the brand or equity. You know, the innovations need to be consumer-led, not technology or innovation-led. Procter & Gamble do that very, very, very well. They think upstream. And actually, in that first job I was talking about, I think I spent probably day upon day, night upon night, in focus group upstream, talking to MGB, so main grocery buyers who are responsible for washing the family's laundry, listening to their experiencing, listening to their needs, trying to develop new innovations and products. And it's consumer led, and that information became cascaded down to their R&D department. So when you come to the innovations, they were completely in line with the equity of the Tide or Ariel brand. Procter do that best, than in my experience. Other companies don't. You know, they're more innovation-led, technology-led, factory-led. Sometimes those factories service a portfolio of, you know, many brands, and so don't have the luxury to be. But I think it's important. Follow the consumer, not the R&D department. You know, because the innovation itself often has a lack of recognition of the market position. You know, the decisions get made in that competitive in that competitive vacuum. And so on. So even though they may have hundreds of innovations or tens of innovations in a product that we might never hear of, because it's not at the service of the brand. And that's just a reality of the marketing and product world today. Embrace tension. This started off as embrace tension within the organization. You know, fight it out. You know, you often have egos, you often have different points of view, you often have competing demands, but that's not the tension I'm talking about. I think brands need to solve a consumer problem, you know, when you do brand positioning. Now, yes, it sits at a very high level, but we need to understand the consumer tension that makes your brand relevant to people's lives. The more tension in your story, the stronger your brand role will have. The more tension that you try to solve, the more relevance and a role you will have that people will find value in. And it gets interesting because marketers shy away from tension. You know, that idea of actually being a little bit abrasive or speaking of the negative, you know, is quite an uncomfortable place to be. This is advertising and this is marketing after all. Advertisers need it. And we believe consumers respond well to it. You know, Just Do It is a classic example. You know, their broad belief is that athlete in all of us, but the consumer tension, if we think about ourselves and, you know, specifically me, people will always find an excuse not to follow through with their good intentions. So therefore Nike becomes that rally cry to get up and go. You know, the bigger the tension, the stronger the role for your brand. And Diesel, similarly, another Publicis brand, you know, is continually year on year relevant to its target market, and it seeks bravery out of its audience. But their consumer tension is the freer and more, you know, the world, the more we trap ourselves in conformity. And that's an interesting consumer truth for their target. So, you know, and that's why largely they set themselves outside of the conventional approach, and fits very well and been very, very successful for them, you know, as a brand over a long period of time. Certainly conscious of time. I think this is one of the more surprising ones. Create, sell, defend, adjust, sell, defend. Brand positionings can take a very long time to create. I talk about a workshop being a day and a half or 2 days long. A brand positioning process can be 3 to 6 months long in its inception to its acceptance within the organization, and then years after that to actually start to reap its benefit. So it can take a very long time to do, or alternatively, it can, you can be asked to do it in no time at all, which isn't great. But the point here, you have to sell, defend, adjust to so many different stakeholders to ensure they become advocates of it, sometimes up to 19 times. And these large, certainly global organizations, they can have all these different layers. So the job is not done when you walk out of that room with everyone's signature on the bottom saying, I'm going to live and breathe this. It's probably only just begun. And that constant selling, being an advocate, that's where that framework comes, where you've got to take away subjectivity as to why this is relevant to the job you're trying to achieve. And the best example I've got is 19 opportunities to be killed along the way, which is soul destroying, at its core, because you've spent 6 months. And what's interesting, the higher up the food chain you go, or the chain of command you go, often the more you have to listen to these people, and often the more disconnected from marketing or the nuance of marketing they can be. So it actually gets, your document becomes more fragile. And that's why simplicity, that's why ambition, that's why a rally cry and advocacy within an organization is huge. And it doesn't stop there, certainly, and I speak from the position of an ad agency. Once it's gone through that 6+ months, approved by the client side, the process starts all over again with our executive creative directors. You try and say, so this brand, this is what it stands for. And certainly the egos can suggest that actually, you can be discarded, or at least try to be discarded, instantly. It's like, it's rubbish, start again. So when I talk about practice, I'm not talking about the crafting of it. I'm talking about, what you need to do to protect this. You need to understand it, why you've done it, what value it has, and believe in it to protect it all along the food chain, to ensure it becomes a usable document within an organization, and one which sets the guardrail for every decision they make. Models give a false sense of security. We're not filling boxes, we're telling a story. The worst people are the ones that fill the box. Do this, tell me what the values are. I use a different model here because this is how brand positionings often live. This is the Unilever key. Again, your lecturers and tutors know better than I, but certainly one of the, this is one of the more famous brand positioning models they've got. Each box needs to tell a story and connect to the next. And they give a false sense of security because once the box is full, you think the job is done. But there's no place for marketing jargon. We need to speak with ambition, with impact, and speak like a human. There's no place for big words or complex arguments. One of the harder lessons I learned, certainly as a strategist, you're supposed to, be able to bring that exterior consumer view, but also, let's say, the marketing or advertising smarts to the conversation. That it's not that game. It's the game of impact with a particular target market. And so, interestingly, after years and years in uni, I had to unpick a lot of that. I had to unpick the way I told a story. I have to unpick the language you use, because the style is different. And so I'd argue clarity, simplicity, impact, message given, message intended needs to be the message received as well. So it's not about the model, it's about one clear story with one clear idea that works as a system in those. And these are different examples. I believe that's a Unilever one, Nestle top left, Tabcorp, which is a gambling company, GlaxoSmithKline, it's an old Robina one. They do Panadol, Sensodyne, and that seems to be the model they use. But again, they're largely, similar in their construction, different in their design. Sometimes people bring in different, but the Unilever one and certainly the Nestle one on the top left, where it's about the target, about the benefits, about the attributes, seem to be the way of brand positioning, or that statement gets codified into an organization. And last point, just conscious of time, certainly positioning grocery is harder than positioning technology. I've built a career on FMCG or CPG, you know, fast-moving consumer goods. What do I love about it? You know, it's not as sexy, as Vodafone. It's good to work on Vodafone. I did in the past. But what I love about it is from a positioning, you're often trying to persuade people to prefer a parity product over another. You don't get the benefit of Tesco. You don't get the benefit of Telstra having, you know, the largest network. You don't get the simple benefits of a new product feature, you know, with 3 cameras on a Huawei phone to be your news. So from a positioning of grocery, there's 30,000 plus, I've heard, probably more, probably less, grocery products in Woolworths. And we're trying to persuade one person to prefer one parity product over another. And that's where you can really start to see the value of occupying a position, a draw in a person's mind that is long-term and enduring. You know, and nothing is commoditized, must I say. I've, you know, even worked with Cerebos on salt, sacks of salt, you know, and trying to get people to pay a premium for salt, one of the most, you know, seemingly commoditized products in a market. But, you know, you find out little things, you know, sacks of salt, table salt is the cheapest. Sea salt can be, you know, sold for an absolute premium. The reality is table salt, the refined stuff, costs exponentially more to produce than the sea salt stuff, which is much less refined. But certainly consumers, you know, see it a completely different way. You know, and that in part, you know, comes down to positioning, you know, and the stories we tell. Water's probably another not too dissimilar story. So, and I think certainly in some categories, health being one, but, you know, we're fortunate enough to live in a regulated society as well. Baby food, children's food, all food, I guess. You know, regulations are getting tighter in many, many different categories. And interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of categories, not just health, are forbidding claims. Literally, you know, you can't say anything that would imply a benefit or that states a factual benefit. The art is the implication of one. You know, and so brand positioning makes the difference there. So, you know, Steve Jobs, if you've ever seen Launching Think Different on YouTube, people don't buy products or services. You know, they buy feelings and experiences they get from them. And really, I think, you know, from the art of brand positioning, that's what we're trying. That's what we need to remember. And that's how we get into their mind, is really inspire them and tell them something relevant in a way that makes them feel or experience something different. And with that, I will, you can read the summary if the text isn't too small. But, you know, I'm as a practitioner, hopefully you can start to see how brand positioning lives in the real world, and some of the challenges of being the guardian of that. You know, makes it quite you know, an artful way to defend and protect and maintain the purity of through all those different challenges.
That's absolutely brilliant, Simon. Can I just ask you to stop sharing screen? Thank you. And we'll go back to full gallery view. And students that are still here, if I can ask you to turn on your camera, that would be great. So put a face to the name. That'd be fantastic, since we've got Simon linking with us from Brisbane. That was absolutely wonderful. And it was sort of ironic, really, because just this morning I've been talking about models.
Yes.
And you've totally ripped them apart. So, well, you know, to a certain extent, in your brand positioning and practice 9 points, which are incredibly salient. And I think that's wonderfully insightful and really, really interesting for students. Well, certainly at Swinburne, where they are, because brand positioning is certainly something that's pertinent to the campaign challenge. Certainly Suzuki, I think, are fairly happy with Deloitte Digital's positioning at the moment, but I think the elephant in the room is the global pandemic. You know, I think I had a small chat to you about that before, and, you know, what's the world going to look like? And I think before I ask students to ask questions, because I'm conscious of time, I'd really like to gauge your view on what the world would be like in 12 months' time for a brand, and should they be brave in that space and attempt to reposition, or should they actually stay with what they know and what they have?
Yeah, good question. I'm not familiar with Suzuki's position. They do need to be refined, and certainly a global pandemic gives cause to ask that question without. What I do know, and it's what we touched upon before, is sentiment is changing weekly. Certainly, and at different speeds in Brisbane and other parts of Australia, like Melbourne, as an example. One of the best things I saw this year, and it was done by a company called Sprout Research, and they actually are tracking consumer sentiment. By sentiment, I mean, their mind and mood almost as we go through this pandemic, and they track that and map that along the grief cycle. And they're from acceptance and anger and whatever the different steps are. And I think the interesting point to me was we had our early days of anger. We had our early days of rejection. We had our early days of, why is this happening? Why am I home? And potentially that's looped back now. I'm very dark. I must turn on my light. 1 second. Haven't been moving enough.
You've gone for the very atmospheric.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't first time. It's getting darker here in Brisbane, no daylight saving. One of the things that stood out was a lot of the inclination and the pivots of the brand initially went, functionally to delivery and contactless, but towards that sense of security and that sense of trust and credibility. And certainly, I think there's going to be some categories where trust, becomes much more, important, efficacy and so on. Cars might not be one of them. I think the flip side of that, and what was the insight for me, is the human spirit's a wonderful thing. And when we've been locked down or caged or wrapped up for too long, our inclination is to open up again, but we're opening up potentially in 2021 in a world of uncertainty, and a world with the unknown. So it's a balance, a reaction to your question. I think there's opportunities for brands to recognize the uncertainty, but balancing that with a sense of enablement and empowerment for them to go and enjoy their newfound freedom, if you like. But it's not go your own way freedom like Isuzu does in the car or ute category. It's a much more tempered one. And I think, again, look for the frisson points, that idea of, I want to break tension points. I want to break free, yet I'm kind of also a little bit scared of that as well. Or I don't know what that means when I can't do what I used to do to be free. So yeah, I think that it definitely, for the sake of a brand like Suzuki, who potentially, again, forgive me if I'm wrong, is not necessarily market leader, they have the opportunity, the cultural time or the contextual time to have an evolved conversation with their consumer, and to be it's an opportunity for them to signal to prospects and consumers and future consumers that they understand what's going on. And maybe as a brand that's, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 down the food chain, I don't know how the category split, but yeah, I think there's definitely worthwhile doing that.
Oh, they're definitely not market leader, but they've certainly, I think, grown fairly well and fairly strongly in the last few years. Certainly, I'm not trying to say Deloitte is, well, they are a great, agency, I guess, within a consultancy, but they've done some great work for Suzuki. And I think that the positioning of Suzuki at the moment is quite strong. But, and I think why I say that and why I ask that is Victoria is under so much pressure economically at the moment. And it's almost separate to the rest of Australia. So I think it's in a way, when you're forward planning and you're thinking about the position of the brand moving forward, there's a lot of external challenges coming in.
Yeah.
Look, I thank you very much. Sorry, Simon. I might just hand it over to students because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah. Sorry, so, talk a lot.
Is there any questions from any students? Yes, go for it, Renee.
I was wondering about the getting into the minds of consumers and how you say to create a new category or be the first in a new category. Can that include non-tangible things?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And probably is non-intangible. But what I mean by create a new category, it's not the features and benefits. It's not come up with something new like Uber did as an example, but certainly create a new way by which they assess their brand. I think the AA, and none of us are English and none of us are old enough, did that well. The AA in the UK, it was like the RACQ or the RAA or the NRMA in Sydney and so on. I don't know what it is in Victoria. And they, position themselves, you normally have the 3 emergency services and then you have, people that fix cars. You have they position themselves as the 4th emergency service. So, they were able to sort of elevate themselves out of their current category they were in and put themselves into, a completely new category to be, assessed and certainly borrow that equity. So definitely not features and benefits, but, some of the more intangible pieces and of the mind we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, guys, anyone from Western Sydney or University of Queensland have any questions? I'm not quite sure who's still with us. John and Nick, do you have any questions? Are you there?
Yes. Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, John.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I'm driving at the moment, so. But
Pull
thanks,
over.
Simon. Yeah. No. I wish I could. But Simon, no, that's all great. It's all. That's a great speech and a great talk and lots of really good insights there. I suppose my thing.
We might have lost you, John.
Yeah, I was going to say,
The only thing I would comment on is I actually don't think they are.
Sorry, John, we're losing you a bit. Do you want to repeat what you're saying?
Well, I don't know if you can hear me. That's the problem. I'm not sure. I'm in a bad area. Can you hear me or?
He can hear you right now. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, I've pulled over. I've got a spot. Yeah. No, just David, with your feedback on the advertising for Suzuki and sort of looking at what I've seen in the marketplace from them, I just think there's a big disconnect with what they're doing and the actual target they're trying to connect with. Right. So from a brand point of view, obviously for fun's sake, but it doesn't seem to be quite, doesn't seem to be quite connecting. And the brand, I mean, it's only new, the new brand positioning. It's only been around for 6 months. But they're not really, I don't know if you've looked at much of it, Simon, if you've...
No, I haven't.
Yeah. And it's nowhere near, it's in the top, it's not a market leader by any means, certainly not in the motor vehicle industry. It might be a bit higher up in the bikes.
Motorbikes, yeah.
Yeah, but it's probably in the, it's probably sitting around, I think they actually said that it was around the 15 position. So,
yeah, competitive. But that might be, the argument there. I mean, 6 months of a new brand positioning from a practice point of view, to tell a CMO that we need to change that is fraught with it's a political game you play, absolutely. Yeah. But the analysis might be, is the work that's in market living up to that brand position? What do you, why, what are its shortfalls? What are its strengths? How do you strengthen that go-to-market approach in that? So, it's there. I think that's the beauty of this. There is never, part of advertising, part of marketing is to make sure we're solving the right problem. And so then 50% of the work is identifying which problem to solve. And that's where, this debate is absolutely relevant. Do you change the brand position? We have to work out if the brand position is the problem. Or, as John was saying, is the execution of the brand position, substandard. So, or
Yeah.
I think
substandard.
what you're thinking, John, is that the target market is incorrect. Is that what
No,
you're implying?
no, I actually
Oh,
think the market is quite correct, and I think the
oh,
brand positioning is quite good. I just don't think that the actual execution is connecting with either.
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
you
that's
know,
an
just
art director speaking, I think.
yes. Well, that's just my personal opinion from what I've
Yeah,
seen
yeah,
and what I've
interesting.
done from a research point of view.
Yeah, great.
You know, I just that's my personal opinion and my sort of feedback on it. That's all. I just think there's some really good opportunities there. So it's really exciting for the students, you know, because they are kind of the target audience and slightly older than the students. So there's a really good opportunity there for them.
Mm. Yeah, I think for fun's
Great.
sake, reaction can sound maybe frivolous. Um,
Mm.
but then again, identify the problem, because, you know, you don't execute your brand position. You know, you execute against a contextual challenge
Yeah.
you're facing in 2021. So again, if you don't have to execute fun's sake in its pure form in 2021. You know, there's other ways to
Yeah.
access it,
That's
or
right.
other messages that need to be reinforced given the context or given the market of Suzuki. So challenging one, you know,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
very challenging.
Yeah. Okay.
Student, any other? Thank you, John. Is there any other
That's
student
okay.
questions? I think the students have a big challenge ahead of them, which is great. It's exciting, and I think you know, we're all very excited to see what they come up with. Well, certainly by October, which is when they are in the running to pitch to Deloitte and Suzuki direct. So you know, it's a bit of repositioning, or because it's a brand level brief, and ultimately, I think that's what Deloitte's after: a slight reposition of what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
You know, from what I get, they're very happy with the work, but the sales numbers aren't there.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about that, David, is most agencies are always happy with their work. So that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, you know.
Yeah, the problem's always elsewhere. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, guys, just students, I'm very conscious of time, and we're already over time. So this is a last chance to put up a question direct and live to right now. So to Simon, whilst he's online from Brisbane.
Sorry, I did have a
I think
question.
that's a no. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yeah, Laura,
Sorry.
go for it.
I did have a question. It's a bit more like of a personal question, but I was just sort of wondering, how did you sort of get into the brand positioning strategy sort of field, or did you start out knowing that was what you wanted to do, or just sort of?
No.
It sounds really. I'm just sort of wondering how your pathway led to there.
Yeah, I think advertising, we mentioned earlier, it's a home for people from different areas. You know, everyone's got a different background. And probably when I started, honestly, the communication pathway in through university wasn't as established as it is now. It is, and it's a shame, you know, because I've had to kind of catch up, or, you know, not catch up, but learn on the job. And, you know, externally, I studied architecture, believe it or not, which has a lot of similarities to being a strategist, because you learn to, at least in your early years, it's about ideas. You know, it's about abstract things and making them tangible. It's about talking about something, you know, physical or three-dimensional, you know, or visual in a way. So I sort of had that, you know, after many years of architecture, to be able to talk about an idea, talk about design, talk about, you know, all that sort of stuff, kind of, you know, well underhand. And honestly, the way I got in was, you know, certainly approached Saatchi's years and years ago, and I was living in London at the time, and you know, they gave me basically a challenge, you know, and I took that on. It was about Pro Vitamin Pantene hair at that stage. I think it was Sunsilk, that was their brand, and you know, I basically had to write an analysis of that, you know, and got in at the ground level, and you know, sat in focus groups for 2-3 years, and did that upstream, not necessarily communication planning work, but product development work, which was a much more sort of natural transition from my background, you know, to come into product design, basically. And from there, that became strategic, and, you know, fast forward, you know, still here. So, but that's not an uncommon story. I think creatives come in from anywhere, and they still do. You know, our ECD here is one of the smartest, most challenging ECDs, which is so refreshing. You know, and he's a lawyer, and so on. And there's different pathways. You've got award school now. You've got certainly communication and advertising degrees, which kind of give that. But again, it's hard. It's a little bit harder now. I recognise. Relationships, contacts, internships, if they're legal, I don't even know whether they are, but certainly those relationships, you know, are the way in, you know, and keep a book, even if you're not a creative, keep a book of your strategy, keep a book of the strategies that you're developing, because it gives you something to talk about. When you're sitting in front of us, it's not, hi, how are you? What's your story? This is something I've got. It didn't work here. It was really successful there. I wish we changed that. We want people who can talk. We want people who can, you know, persuade clients and persuade people. So, you know, keep the book, give us someone to talk about. It doesn't have to be perfect. What it has to be is a talking point, I think.
Yeah, that's great, Simon. I'll just jump in there. That's excellent, Simon, that feedback, because that's exactly what, you know, I'm sort of telling the students, you need that book. You still need the book. Mm-hmm. You need some examples of the work that you've worked on, because that's what's going to get you the foot in the door. And all those things around, you know, keeping those networks, opening up those networks and things like that.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like we just want, I think the ones that succeed are the ones with energy and enthusiasm. The reality, you're transitioning. The expectation is not that you are the greatest advertising or marketing practitioner in the world. The expectation is you come at everything with energy, enthusiasm, and a willingness to learn, you know, and that will get you everywhere. You know, it really will.
That's great. And probably on that note, Simon, I'm probably going to have to close the session. I'd like to thank you again for agreeing to present to the students today. And obviously it's been recorded and available to everyone who couldn't make it. Look, it was really wonderful, very insightful. I particularly love your 9 brand positioning and practice points. Very disruptive, but also very, very, very interesting. And then I think the students will certainly lap that up on review. So thank you for your time today.
Pleasure. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I wish you all well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right. Good night, everyone.